What's up, everyone? Today I am going to try to figure out what the heck to do with these Hinoki Cypress, Sekka Hinoki. All right, well, a while ago on this channel, I actually did a video on a smaller Sekka Hinoki, and it's really interesting because these are actually really easy to propagate, but beyond the propagation, I've had some significant problems with growing them out. Now you might notice that this group of Sekka has a slightly different look to it than some Sekka that you might have seen, say, on the Bonsai Q channel or anywhere else, really. And one of the things that I've noticed is that the coloration of the foliage is very different if I keep it in my greenhouse versus outside in full sun. Now here in California, we don't have really humid summers, so it's not a very good analogous situation to Japan, and maybe the humidity or the combination of humidity and slightly lower light levels is what is causing that difference in coloration. I actually vastly prefer the coloration that I get from the greenhouse growing, and I see more reliable growth in the greenhouse than I do outside. So with all of the trees, I have about maybe 25 of them in roughly gallon containers in the greenhouse, and I had no dieback or problems over the winter, whereas some of the ones that I had outside in the field did have some dieback or even died entirely. The other thing is that out in the field, I noticed they make these balls of sort of like pollen cones that then look really dense and end up turning brown. Really not very attractive. All right, so the stem on this guy is not super thick, but it is maybe about the size of a pencil, certainly not the size of my finger. And if I rotate this around, you see that there's a bunch of really big shoots here, and this hasn't been trimmed at all. This is just sort of the natural habit of this plant that I propagated by cutting. So essentially, this is the third growing season that this has been going. And when Daisaku Nomoto was over here for the Pacific Bonsai Expo, Jonas and I had a conversation with him about how do you work with these? Because I've had a lot of people basically say, yeah, they just die. So maybe that's partly the climate, maybe it's the way that we've been trimming them. I'm not really sure, but I'm going to go through Daisaku's recommendations essentially as a starting point and see how it goes. Daisaku talked about the lower leaves down here in the shaded area starting to turn brown. I'm not really seeing that as much on here as I do on the ones that are outside, so it makes me pause a little bit, but I'm just going to go ahead and do the same thing. So he's basically saying in midsummer of the third growing season after you've rooted it and it's gotten to grow out for a while, you do a major cut, and so that's what I'm going to start with here. I'm going to take off all of these large shoots and actually use them as cuttings. I stopped propagating these a while ago after selling a few flats of them, but then realized that if I don't continue propagating them, I can't ever really figure out what's going on with them and what I need to do in order to be more successful. So I need to continue propagating them and also continue working on them rather than just staring at them. All right, so that is a lot of foliage removal. And as opposed to the last time I did a video about these where I wired the shoots over in order to try to get it to bush out, the result of that was not good, but I don't know because I only used one tree in order to do the experiment, whether or not it was the bending that caused weakness in the tree or something else like a root condition or something like that. I'm going to go ahead and trim the remainder of the other, four that are in the same flat. In this case, the height here is something that I don't really want. If I'm going to make a shohin tree from this, these are definitely something that you can air layer, but I want to try to get some of the splits. Let me just thin out a little bit of this foliage here. All right, so for that one, I'm going to leave it at that for now. I could potentially cut way back down into here, but I'm not sure it's going to do me any good. So we'll see how it goes with that taller version of this one. Now, these obviously are in pond baskets, and I've been reasonably happy with the way that they're growing in the greenhouse in pond baskets. I wouldn't necessarily say that the same thing is true outdoors, and I think that they will grow better in hard-sided containers. Cypress, or Chamaecyparis, as well as cypress, this being a Hinoki Cypress variety, it's a Chamaecyparis or false cypress, and I find they have very aggressive root systems, to the point where you have to repot them more frequently than a juniper or a pine tree by far. I'm trying to clear out a little bit of the growth around this strong clump of branches to see if I can really see the structure. I think generally these are grown either as like a formal upright or kind of a formal upright looking trunk or clump, excuse me, in Japan. And one of the reasons is just the natural growing habit is so strongly headed in that direction. But I think the other reason is that with these clumps of branches that they form, you can end up with reverse taper relatively quickly. And I think that because they're so easy to air layering at that swelling point is probably going to give you some good options for making clumps. All right, and this one looks pretty similar to a couple of the others, but I'm gonna basically treat them all about the same, leaving about an inch of these low branches on here. And then I am going to, what the heck with this one, I'll cut it lower. Yeah, well, we'll see how that goes. Back into the greenhouse for that. All right, and last one that is going to be pruned. This one actually looks like it has kind of an interesting structure. So basically, I'm hoping that by pruning these back this hard and then putting them back in the greenhouse, that I'll get some good reaction to the pruning. The instructions that Daisaku gave us were that you want to do hard pruning in the third year, and you want, in order to basically establish this beginning of the structure, and then the timing in the third year is somewhere between April and July. Now, I always have to take advice from Japan with a little bit of a grain of salt because the climate is so different here. If you live in North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, that kind of an area, coastal and hot and humid all summer, you probably have more of an analogous environment to Japan than we do here in California. All right, now to do some propagation. I actually don't think that these little guys are probably nearly as useful as bigger pieces, but I'm going to try a few of each. You know, like, so this has a stem that's pencil size already, and just removing some of this small foliage on the side and then dipping in some rooting hormone and putting it in there is probably going to give me a faster start than using something that's more like this, where the wood is so much smaller. One of the things I notice is that when I pull off some of these needles or little tufts of foliage, a lot of times it appears to also pull off parts of the cambium. Now, initially I would think that that's actually a bad thing, but one of the techniques in doing cuttings is actually to wound the side of the cutting to increase the exposure of the cambium and cause more rooting. So we'll just see how it goes. All right, my standard rooting hormone for conifers is Hormex number 8. I don't think I'm going to have any trouble getting these to root. And the reason I was clearing off a bunch of the needles at the bottom is basically to not have foliage be buried and rotting in the soil. All right, so I've got my container full of cuttings here, and I'm going to put these in my greenhouse under a little bit of mist, but I'm pretty sure that if you wanted to do them yourself, you could just wrap it in a plastic bag and put it in the shade, and you would get at least some success. I don't think the mist is 100% necessary, but it'll increase the survival rate of the cuttings. I didn't use all of it. I tried to concentrate on using the bits that had larger wood in them, because getting that wood going seems to be the slow part. You have to let them really run. Now, I have to say, in retrospect, I think maybe I cut off a little bit too much of the foliage, so we'll have to see how I do with these. Like I said at the beginning, I have another 20 or so of these, so what I'm going to do with those is maybe do a little bit lighter trim, because I think I remember Daisaku telling me that you should only trim off about half to 2/3 of the healthy foliage, and I'm pretty sure that I did more like 80 or 90% on most of these. In any case, back at it with Sekka Hinoki, and hopefully I will get some good results this time. That does it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.